Welcome to StarSpeak with Astrologer Maureen Richmond. Here's where you'll find the latest news on what's up with the heavens. Looking for the inner message from outer space? This is your place. So join me in welcoming your host, Astrologer Maureen Richmond.
Welcome, star friends. This is Astrologer Maureen Richmond, and you're listening to StarSpeak on the UNX Digital Broadcasting Network. Today's date is February 7, 2024. Thank you so much for stopping by to listen to my ideas about the astrological influences behind some important developments on our planet. This episode of StarSpeak, I'm going to share with you some of my research results over the last 8 months or so. I've been studying UFO sightings and encounters. I've collected about 300 of those from various sources that I regard as reliable. Some of the sources that I've gathered that information from include the MUFON Journal, which comes out monthly, Richard Dolan's UFOs for the 21st Century Mind, an excellent book by a PhD historian, and Triangular UFOs by David Marler, also a wonderful look at a long segment of history involving UFO sightings and encounters. We Are Not Alone by Mark Hartzman, and many other sources. 300 UFO sightings and encounters. That's a lot of human experience. Some of those sightings and encounters took place amongst hundreds of people, some in smaller groups, and some were experienced by individuals. In collecting this big sample of 300 or so UFO sightings and encounters, I had a lot of objectives. One was to get a diverse sampling, and another was to get reliable information as to the dates and times that these events occurred. This is all of great importance to those of us who are passionately curious about the UFO reality. We want to experience this directly for ourselves. We know it's out there. We've heard the stories. We've read the books. We've looked at the videos. We've gone to the conferences. We understand this experience is part of the human connection to the cosmos right now. And most of us have on our minds the question, how can I see or experience this too? Where do I need to go? What time do I need to be there? That was the question that gripped my mind. And as an astrologer, naturally, I seize upon the timing end of the question. Now, there are techniques in astrology that would also address the question of locations, specifically astrocartography and astrolocality. That we can talk about at another time. For this episode on February 7, 2024, I'm going to be talking about the question of time and what astrological influences play into creating the moment in time when UFO sightings and encounters occur. My 300 sightings, as I have studied them and correlated the astrological influences happening at that time with those events, have taught me that there are basically two types of astrological influence that play in here. First is major aspect patterns that take a long time to come into shape or formation and stay that way for a year or so. Major aspect patterns, those are geometrical relationships of the celestial bodies as mapped within the circle of the zodiac. It's a geometrical arrangement that can easily be mapped through the methods of astrological perception. That's really what it is. Astrology is a method of perception that concerns itself with the space surrounding the Earth, our place in space, and our relationship to the greater environment. So these major aspect patterns are one level of influence. And then there's another, which depends on the rotation of the Earth on its own axis. As the Earth turns every day, over the course of the day, we get a completely different view of the sky. And it's this movement of the Earth rotating on its own axis that causes the appearance of the rising of the sun and the climbing of the sun up to the highest point in the sky for that day. We call that noon. And then the apparent passage of the sun over to the western horizon, and we call that the settings of the sun. And then as the Earth continues to turn and roll eastward, the sun is behind the Earth, and we call that midnight. That motion of the Earth turning on its own axis like that also brings different stars and planets into our view and onto the eastern horizon, onto the southern sky, the western horizon, and the midnight point behind us every single day. When any celestial body is located directly east, overhead, to the west, or back at the midnight point, astrologers call those positions angular. A-N-G-U-L-A-R. Angular. The word angular in astrology is a specialized term. It's part of the jargon or vocabulary of the field. And it simply means around those locations. Anything that's angular is in those places. For example, at sunrise, when the sun is on the eastern horizon, the sun is angular. In the middle of the day, around noon, when the sun is at the highest point that it will reach that day in the southern sky for the northern hemisphere, the sun is angular. When the sun is setting on the western horizon, it's angular. And when it's behind the Earth and we don't see it, and it's at the midnight point, it's angular. And that's all that word means. It means located at one of those four cardinal points. And why is a celestial body located there? Well, by virtue of the Earth's turning on its own axis. So that's a very natural thing that happens without anybody doing anything whatsoever. It's just part of nature and life, and we live with it, but it's there. Astrologers study that and correlate that motion and the results of those motions to human experience, to events and what's going on. And that's what I have studied in regard to the UFO sighting and encounter experience, looking at all of the celestial bodies in the solar system. Not just the sun, but the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. When I say the moon, yes, I mean the Earth's moon. And even though conventional science does not consider Pluto to be a planet, it is still of use in the astrological system, which recognizes it as a worthy archetype. And we still use it in our calculations. As a matter of fact, we're going to be looking at the influence of Pluto on UFO sightings and encounters here in just a minute. So again, there are two levels of influence. One, the big major aspect patterns that take a long time to shape up and stay in place for sometimes up to a year, sometimes more. And secondly, the angular placement of planets, which shapes up very quickly. As a matter of fact, there are 4 times every day that one or the other of the celestial bodies is on one of those cardinal points, and hence angular. And if we allow about 5 degrees of a difference above the horizon and 5 below, that nets a period of about 40 minutes that any celestial body can be on one of those 4 points and still be considered angular. So that happens 4 times a day. In other words, frequently, every single day. And these are the 2 motions that we're going to be looking at tonight as I talk. The major aspect patterns are really important, I've found out, as I have studied these 300 reports on sightings and encounters with UFOs and anomalous vehicles in general, whether it happens to be a metallic-looking mechanical item that is not like something of the earth, or whether it's a light form or any of the other manifestations or appearances that the unidentified flying object or unidentified aerial phenomena or anomalous phenomena take these days, no matter what the appearance is. These underlying influences are very important. In fact, they're so important that they've been in the picture at some of the most dramatic and compelling UFO sightings and encounters that are known in history. We have now about 80 years of history in modern times on UFO sightings and encounters. Of course, there were such things in the deep past before that time. But since the 1940s, human beings have been doing a better job of keeping records on this. And so there's a lot more information to consider as a result. One of the periods that stands out as very productive of compelling and dramatic UFO encounters is the Uranus-Pluto conjunction of the mid-1960s. The Uranus-Pluto conjunction shapes up once every 130 years or so. Sometimes it's a little bit longer than that because Pluto's orbit is very elliptical, and that produces an irregular speed or rate of movement through the zodiac. Its orbit is also highly angled to the plane of the solar system. So Pluto really is a special case. Grant you that. But still, we do have a Uranus-Pluto cycle. And what is that? Well, it's the period of time between successive conjunctions of those 2 bodies as perceived through the zodiac. Again, they are perceived to be in the same degree of the zodiac around once every 130 years. The last time was 1964, 65, and 66. Anybody who knows a bit about world history will immediately recognize that period as a massively tumultuous period of time that was just rife with developments in social revolution in the arts, in racial relationships. Warfare was going on, the Vietnamese conflict the United States was involved in, and all manner of technological advances were accomplished that would lead to the computer age. In this period of time, the United States space program accelerated and really took off, so to speak, literally into space and also into concepts and understandings. It was a period of great creativity, radical alteration of the previous status quo, change in fashion, change in music, change in people's social mores, quite a watershed period of time. Well, it also generated a couple of seminal UFO sightings and encounters. December of 1965 played an important role in that regard. That was the time of the Kecksburg incident, December 9, 1965. Thousands of people across North America witnessed a piece of this UFO sighting and encounter. A brilliant object was seen streaking across the skies in Canada that day, and it continued over Michigan and Ohio, ultimately to drop down to Earth in Pennsylvania, near Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. When this object did land, it was discovered to be shaped somewhat like an acorn, and it had a band around it that bore what appeared to be writing reminiscent of Egyptian hieroglyphics. Now, that doesn't mean that it came from ancient Egypt. That's just a description of what people thought the writing looked like. So it was linear, possibly something like ideograms, like the Egyptian hieroglyphs use, but it was definitely something that looked like an attempt at communication in a written form. Uranus and Pluto had been conjunct for a year and a half or so. They were separated by only 2 degrees of zodiacal longitude at the time of the crash. This literally was something extraordinary that just fell out of the sky and changed humanity's understanding of its environment and the potentials in that environment. Where did this object come from? No one knew. It was an unknown and yet suggestive of intelligence from beyond. Just a few months later, in April of 1966, one of the most extraordinary group UFO sightings encounters of all time occurred. This one happened in Melbourne, Australia on April 6, 1966, when 100 students and teachers at the Westall High School were surprised on a regular school day at about 10:30 in the morning to look out on their schoolyard and see hovering over nearby power lines multiple classic silver UFOs in the disc shape. These multiple UFOs hovered, eventually landed, and then turned on edge and shot directly up in space. Now, just 2 days before, Uranus and Pluto had been precisely and exactly conjunct as perceived within the zodiac. That was on April 4, 1966, when Uranus and Pluto were lined up on the same side of the Earth and perceived through the 16th degree of Virgo in the zodiac. So there was a precise Uranus-Pluto conjunction, and just 2 days later, this extraordinary event, which changed the situation radically for humanity, because there was then no question that vehicles, aerial vehicles, UFOs, whatever one might want to call them, unknown to our world, were indeed interacting with humanity. Interestingly, at 10:30 a.m. on that day in Australia, the Earth had turned on its own axis just so that, guess what? Those two planets, Uranus and Pluto, creating this powerful societal shift in paradigm, was precisely at the midnight point behind the Earth. Well, it wasn't midnight because the sun was up, but Pluto and Uranus were back there at the midnight point, and hence angular. So there you have it. The major long-term aspect patterns falling into place for the historical epoch, and then the precise time of day being revealed by the angularity of that configuration. So that's pretty exciting. That's what my research has shown me. And that right there is a very, the West Hall High School incident is a really great example of how it takes both of those levels of influence to produce a moment in time where there is a UFO sighting or encounter. Some people like to talk about that experience as an opening of a portal. If we want to come at it from that angle, we would say then it takes these two levels of influence to open the portal in time and space for that communication to occur between our human world and the beyond. Let's take a look now at the year 1975. The year 1975. And I need to bring something up on my computer here. Give me just a moment. Yeah, 1975. The astrological situation was different. Saturn and Uranus had both moved on, as they do in time, as they continue on in their orbit around the sun, and we perceive them in different locations of the zodiac as a result. And by this time, Saturn, I wasn't talking about Saturn before, I was talking about Pluto and Uranus, pardon me, but all the planets moved on. So by this time, Uranus had moved on into another sign, and so also Saturn, and they had moved into what we call a square. That's a 90-degree separation within the circle of the zodiac. So we're talking about a different planetary pair now. Just a moment, in 1965, it was Uranus and Pluto. Now up in the mid-1970s, it was Saturn and Uranus who were making a specific major aspect pattern. And boy, did we see the results here on Earth. Now, Saturn was at about 3 degrees of Leo and Uranus about 3 degrees of Scorpio during this period. Let me share with you what happened over a period of just a couple of weeks. Starting in late October of this year, 1975, when Saturn and Uranus were in square relationship. By the way, that arrangement shapes up about twice about every 45 years. The entire Saturn-Uranus cycle is about 45 years long. And there are two squares inside of that, one the waxing, one the waning. The Saturn-Uranus cycle is 45 years long because it takes about that long for the two to come into conjunction and then move completely out of that so that they're into opposition and back around the solar system to another conjunction. So the time, period of time between two successive conjunctions is the Saturn-Uranus cycle of 45 years. All right, so in 1975, that cycle was, as we say in astrology, in square relationship. October 27, Loring Air Force Base, Maine. A silent UFO hovered low, invading airspace there at the military base for approximately 7 hours and positioned itself directly over an area where nuclear weapons were stored. Saturn was at 3 degrees of Leo exactly square Uranus at 3 degrees of Scorpio. 3 days later, Wirt Smith Air Force Base, Michigan. A UFO entered restricted airspace. This is a big deal for the military. 4 days later in Medford, Minnesota, on November 2, 1975, while Saturn and Uranus were still square, 20 residents of a small town in southern Minnesota saw a bright reddish-orange disk hovering over a football field after a high school game. A day later, they went back to check on it and found a ring of burned ground on the football field under the position where the craft had been sighted. 3 days after that, the Travis Walton abduction occurred in Snowflake, Arizona, November 5, 1975. You get a sense of how powerful the Saturn-Uranus square was in 1975. And 2 days after the Travis Walton abduction began, in Montana at Malmstrom Air Force Base, a luminous object the size of a football field invaded the site of American intercontinental ballistic missiles. NORAD detected the object, which ascended to a breathtaking altitude of 200,000 feet, and after it left, it was discovered that the computerized targeting system of one of the intercontinental ballistic missiles stored there was dysfunctional. One of those apparent UFO incidents where weapons of mass destruction are disarmed. Saturn square Uranus throughout that whole period. So there are 5 events that occurred. Bing, 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 bing. Right in a few days under the Saturn-Uranus square of 1975. And that's what I mean when I say these major aspect patterns are closely related to important historical UFO sightings and encounters. It's time for a break now. So let's do that. And producer will show you some interesting information on the other side of the break. I'll continue with more discussion of UFOs and the astrology behind their manifestations. See you then.
Are we alone in the universe? The most important question facing humanity is on the verge of being settled once and for all. The Mutual UFO Network has been at the forefront of this journey for nearly 50 years. Our members worldwide are dedicated to the research, documentation, and awareness that will shape the future of humanity. Won't you join us?
Welcome back, star friends. This is Astrologer Maureen Richmond, and you're listening to StarSpeak on the UNX Digital Broadcasting Network. Today's date is February 7, 2024, and I'm talking about the timing factor in the appearance of UFO sightings and encounters. As I was saying on the other side of the break before we heard from MUFON, there are two levels of astrological influence that seem to correlate to UFO sightings and encounters. First, the long-term aspect patterns that take years to shape up and then may last for a year, calendar year or more, and then the short-term daily rotation of the Earth that brings celestial bodies into the positions of angularity at the rising point, the culminating point, or the zenith, the setting point, and the anti-culminating or the nadir point. Those are those angular positions that are so important. There's one more long-term aspect pattern that I'd like to share with you before we go on to a greater discussion of the angularity issue. And this one occurred in 1989. It was the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Such a conjunction occurs once every 36 years. And the last one was in 1989. And during that period of time, Jupiter was also in opposition to those two bodies. So it was a complex arrangement with Saturn and Neptune conjunct in Capricorn and Jupiter over in Cancer opposing those two planets. If you had seen this from above the solar system or beneath the solar system, you would have seen an alignment that might have caught your attention. It would have been Saturn and Neptune on one side of the Earth and pretty much lined up situation, then the Earth in the middle, and then Jupiter on the other side. So you'd seen four bodies, boom, 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 that looked like they were pretty much in a line. So there was something that very interesting in UFO history, which occurred during this period. It was in November of 1989 when Saturn was at 12 degrees of Capricorn and Neptune at 11 Capricorn. They were just a degree off of exactitude. And Jupiter was at 9 degrees of Cancer, opposing them both. In Manhattan, New York, there was a most extraordinary event. 3:15 in the morning, a female person was levitated out of her 12th story apartment window and tractor beamed over to a waiting and hovering UFO. And the reason we know about this is because observers on the ground saw it. At least that's the story, and it's reported in reputable sources. So this was a very anomalous occurrence, to say the very least. It must have blown the minds of the people observing it, and certainly had a powerful effect on the individual who was thus taken out of her 12th story apartment window. Now, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction is a relatively rare arrangement, as you can see. And so is such an experience, which is reported in Mark Hartzman's We Are Not Alone, a wonderful historical study of the UFO situation. This particular incident is reported there. It's discussed other places as well, and well known within the field of UFO history. But note, if you're interested and curious about the astrological drivers of things like this, that there was a very unusual astrological arrangement going on. It wasn't precisely exact, but it was certainly there. And that again was Saturn and Neptune lined up on one side of the Earth and Jupiter opposing them from the other side of the Earth. So let's take a look at angularity and see how it plays into this question. I was talking about earlier the amount of time that any celestial body is present on one of the angles or cardinal points in a day's time. If we use about a 5-degree allowable difference above and below the horizon, that produces a period of about 40 minutes, 4 times a day, that any celestial body will be on one of those points, again, as a result of the Earth's rotation on its own axis. There's not anything hokey here or magical or weird or anomalous about that. This is a fact of nature. The Earth turns on its own axis and brings all the celestial bodies that we're interested in to those points throughout the day. Also the stars that are near the ecliptic plane. The rest of them are not as affected by that. But the business of angular placement is a fact of nature. It's not unusual. It's not anything to worry about. Nobody conjured it up. I didn't dream it up. It's just a normal consequence of the Earth's rotation on its own axis. So 11% of the time throughout the 24 hours of the day, something is angular. It could be the sun, moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. Something is angular out there about 11% of the time. Or I've not said that correctly. Every single celestial body is present on the angles 11% of the time. So there, 10 of them. So that's a great deal of the time that something is angular, except for when they're all clustered together, and that makes a different situation. But something is angular out there frequently, and any particular body is angular 11% of the time every day. So as I was studying the different celestial bodies and how frequently they were angular in the situations of my sample sightings, that's what I was comparing it to. Now, only about half of my 300 sightings have actual known clock times at which they occurred. So I studied this situation of angularity for about half that sample. And what I discovered surprised me. Pluto turned out to be angular 19% of the time. That's way over 11%. Jupiter was angular in UFO sightings and encounters 17% of the time. Uranus was angular in UFO sightings and encounters about 12% of the time. So not much more than it would be expected. But when you rank them all out, it turned out this way. Pluto was most frequently involved in the moment of a UFO sighting or encounter. Jupiter next, then the moon, then the pair Saturn and Uranus, they were equal. The next ranking down were 3 bodies that were all equal in frequency there, and that was Venus, Mars, and Neptune, and then Mercury, then the lunar nodes, and finally the sun. So that's a lot of information, and I haven't really even worked it all out, but that's what I've got so far. Now, we're going to go right to the top and look at Pluto's influence in some specific incidents that you may know about. Right off, January 1953, way back in history now, in Dallas, Texas, police officers and others saw a triangular craft around 3 in the morning. Pluto was overhead at the zenith point, or conjunct the midheaven, as we say in astrology, at 3 a.m. of that day when that happened in that particular event. So let's jump up now to 1978. Pluto was angular at 11 p.m. on January 31, 1978, in Vineland, New Jersey, when a silent triangle UFO was observed. Where was Pluto? At the midnight point behind the Earth. Let's come up to 1990, during the well-known and very impressive Belgian wave of black triangles. On March 30 and 31, the year 1990, numerous triangle craft were observed by all kinds of people and even registered on radar. And the moment when some of those triangle items, objects, vehicles, whatever they were, registered on radar, Pluto was angular. Where was it? Rising on the eastern horizon. Then Pluto was conjunct the ascendant, as we would say in astrology. Pluto was at 17 degrees of Scorpio with the ascendant at 19 Scorpio. And that meant that Pluto had just passed over the eastern horizon point, astrologically determined, as that event was unfolding and as the radar registered these particular triangle vehicles that were all over Belgium at that time. Now the year 2000, over here in the United States, in Illinois, there was another flap, a rash of sightings. This was in January of 2000. In the midst of a night of sightings, which lasted until in the morning at 5:03 in the morning, while it was going on, Pluto was coming up over the ascendant, that'd be on the east point, with Pluto located 12 Sagittarius and the ascendant also exactly 12 Sagittarius at one point in that evening's events when a specific sighting was made. Another flap occurred in the Kansas City area in the year 2022, August 10, 2022. There was a specific event that was contained within a larger series of sightings. This one took place at 5 a.m. on August 10, 2022, when Pluto was setting. Pluto then was located 27 degrees Capricorn, and the descendant was located at 29 Capricorn, which meant that Pluto had just slipped down beyond the western horizon as a result of the Earth's rotation on its own axis, of course. At the same time, Venus was opposing Pluto. So not only was Pluto angular, Venus was, and the Earth was in between. So again, this is a situation where you could have seen something interesting if you were looking at the solar system from above or below. Venus on one side of the Earth, Pluto on the opposite, Earth in the middle. And that was the configuration which was in effect when a very important sighting occurred during the Kansas City flap of August 2022. Now, right nearby, up in northwest Missouri, which is some hundreds of miles away from the Kansas City area, between 5 and 5:30, there was another rash of sightings up in that area. And right in the middle of that event, which would be 5:15 a.m. local time, Pluto was again setting. So these times are very close. 5 a.m. in the Kansas City area, then just 15 minutes later up in the northwest part of Missouri. But both of them occurred during the flap, and both of them correlated to the position of Pluto on the descendant. In other words, angular. Now, from the MUFON Journal of 2023, there comes an interesting report. MUFON Journal of December 2023. Hexagon, a six-sided UFO about 50 feet in diameter, hovered over a harbor on October 31, 2021 at 11 p.m. in St. Ignace, Michigan. Hexagonal UFO, about 50 feet in diameter. It's hovering over a harbor, real low. Not much more than 300 to 500 feet high. So somewhere in the area, maybe 400 feet off ground or above ground level. Underneath, in its undercarriage, it had a complex pattern of red, yellow, and white lights in this hexagonal arrangement. Now, this is very interesting because right in this same place in Michigan, a couple of years later, the United States military would shoot down another hexagonal-shaped unknown flying object. And so the original event was in October of 2021, 11 p.m. So guess what? Pluto was angular. It was setting at that time on October 31, 2021, 11 p.m. at the original event when a hexagonal UFO hovered over a harbor area at a very low altitude. Pluto was a very strong astrological power in that moment, by virtue of its position on the descendant and hence its angularity then. Also from the MUFON Journal, May 2023, comes a report from Tacoma, Washington, about an incident which occurred in March of 2023, March 27 to be exact, 1:38 p.m. A silent, domed UFO with tumbling movement flew against the wind and was sighted in Tacoma, Washington. Very unusual situation. Pluto was again setting. You notice Pluto is setting in many of these incidents. It's a real pattern. There's something going on here. Exactly what? It's too early to say in my research, but there's a pattern. Pluto is setting for this extraordinary UFO sighting of a silent domed UFO making a tumbling movement as it flew against the wind. Also from the MUFON Journal, this time December 2023, is the report of another hexagonal or six-sided UFO. This one was sighted in Louisville, Kentucky on August 28, the year 2022. This particular sighting is outstanding, compelling, and worthy of our attention because at the time of its sighting, there was an exact MADAR hit or alert that was generated in the MADAR system that many MUFON field investigators and others use. Exactly what MADAR is perhaps a good topic for another discussion, but just suffice it to say, it is a technology that is currently being used in an attempt to detect the signature that a UFO is present in the environment. So, August 28, 2022, 4:15 a.m. was the exact clock time when this hexagonal situation or UFO was noticed. Now, there are actually two objects that were sighted at this time. One was round, and it had a hexagonal pattern of lights in its undercarriage. Where was Pluto? Setting again at 27 degrees Capricorn with a descendant of 29 Capricorn, which means that Pluto had just slipped below the western horizon at the time that the individuals who saw this UFO thought to check the time. So Pluto was in the process of setting as that event was shaping up. Pluto was also angular and setting in the Tinley Park Black Triangle incident, which occurred on October 31, 2004 in the vicinity of Chicago, Illinois. It was a long-lasting sighting. Hundreds and hundreds of people saw black triangles hovering at low altitude. At the start of this evening's events, Pluto was located at 21 degrees of Sagittarius with a descendant of 17 Sagittarius. And this means that over the next 35 minutes from the beginning of that evening's flap or continuous sighting, that Pluto would progressively get closer to the descendant and be setting through a good piece of the evening's sightings. So Pluto, again, was on the descendant. Well, that's a lot to take in mind. I know I had some other incidents that I wanted to share with you that show the importance of Uranus setting. Goodness, there's so many. Well, for example, the infamous 29 Palms mass sighting, which occurred on April 20, the year 2021, when 50 Marines walked out of their dining hall to see a black triangle about 150 feet wide hovering for 10 minutes. Now, there's been a lot of discussion and controversy about whether what they saw was an actual UFO or some sort of secret technology that the U.S. military has. Whatever the case, we know the date, place, and time. April 20th, 2021, Camp Wilson, California, at 8:24 in the evening local time, and the planet Uranus was setting or angular at that time, and that might offer a clue as to exactly what was seen. We'll have to come back in another episode to consider the importance of the angular position of Uranus in UFO sightings and encounters, because right now, in the last few minutes of tonight's episode, I want to talk a little bit about the a week ahead and the astrological influences that we're dealing with now. So today's date is February 7, 2024, and at this time, the lunar cycle is concluding from the last new moon, which was in the early part of January. So we're in that part of the lunar cycle in which the energies really support tying up loose ends, not so much starting big new projects. Now that the energy to support that will come soon. In fact, it does with the new moon on February 9. New moon will occur at 4:59 p.m. Central Standard Time on February 9. So that's coming very soon. Again, 4:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. Adjust that time if you're in a different time zone. The new moon moment is a very significant turning point psychologically and physiologically for all of us every single month. It's a natural stimulus to engage us in what comes next on our own individual paths. But right now, as you're first hearing this, if you're hearing it live, as you're first hearing this this broadcast of StarSpeak, we're not there yet. It's the waning part of the lunar cycle, the closing down, the winding down. So it's normal for people to feel a little bit less energetic, a little bit less enthusiastic, a little bit less forthcoming, a little bit less motivated. And that fact intensifies the closer we get to the final hours of the lunar cycle. So today is February 7. We got a couple of days yet to go. So if you see yourself or the people around you not performing quite up to snuff, that's one of the reasons why. We all need a little more rest. We all need a little more space. We all need a little more understanding, maybe a little bit more encouragement during the final hours of the lunar cycle. So we'll make it through this. And we've got a new lease of life coming soon, a couple of days, and the new lunar cycle will initiate ideas, motivations, especially related to the position where the new moon will be, which will be the sun and the moon together at 21 degrees of Aquarius. So that's going to be a blast of Aquarian energy, which is all about science and technology and forward-looking ideas, futuristic visions, cooperation, collaboration, teamwork, friendship, and connection. So we can all look forward to that. There'll be a blast of energy that will move us in that direction. I think we'll all enjoy it. Now, in between there and then and now and then, we have the Sun-Uranus square, which is in effect and palpable on today, February 7, and tomorrow, February 8, with the sun located 19 Aquarius astrologically and Uranus-19 Taurus. This is a restless influence and also somewhat disruptive, but it plays a part in the divine creative process that we're all part of. And what it asks for or inclines us towards is to be creative and innovative or exceptional in some way in our thinking and our efforts. It's somewhat of a disruptive influence. Yes, it is. And it tends to alter the patterns that we live by temporarily. And so if you find this is the case, well, you can study it and know that the sense of intensity, disruption, anxiety that may come with it it's temporary. There's a high point or a spike of that, February 7 and 8, that's true. Some emotional discomfort, anxiety, and uncertainty as conditions are changing drastically and dramatically around us. Yes, they do, with the Sun-Uranus square, but all is not lost. It is not an overwhelmingly drawn out, lengthy influence. And it comes here at the end of the lunar cycle and suggests that there's a lot that we need to do to get rid of impediments, blockages, obstacles, clutter, things we no longer need in our lives. You know, that's always best supported by the waning portion of the lunar cycle. Now is the time to declutter physically as well as mentally, getting rid of those items that we no longer need in the physical world, clothes we don't wear, recycling that needs to go to the recycling facility, and all that sort of thing. So, yeah, that's a good thing to be concerned with now, and take the initiative to use this Sun-Uranus energy to be proactive and make the changes that are necessary to get the clutter out of the way so that you can enjoy the positive influences coming with the new moon here very soon. Thank you so much for being with me once again on StarSpeak. This is Maureen Richmond signing off for the UNX Digital Broadcasting Network.